Hi, I'm Mike Brauer, and I'm just wrapping up another week, second seminar this year. It's December, and it was a great group. And it has become the custom now. We have a few questions at the end. So let's start with Anthony. What is your approach when you start the mix process? In other words, which instrument do you start with? And secondly, when processing a particular instrument, do you use compression after the EQ in the signal chain or the opposite? Give me an example. Well, what my approach for starting the mix process is that I'm immediately looking for what is the essence of this song? What are the 2 or 3 ingredients that I need to focus on first? And then build the mix around that. So it doesn't have to be drums and bass. Quite often, actually, that becomes more of a support. So I'll start maybe with a piano and a vocal, or an acoustic guitar and a vocal. Or maybe it's just a particular keyboard feel and build around that, because that's what feels good to me. And that allows the focus to never get diluted, because these are the most important ingredients of the mix, and that has to be center stage, and everything else I build around it, and I'll naturally EQ properly. And as soon as I'm starting to lose the main ingredients, I know that new instrument needs to either be taken out or EQ differently. I generally compress after the EQ. I mean, I usually EQ after I compress. And the reason is that the EQ is going to be triggering the compressor. So if I have a lot of compression going on and it's squeezing the sound and it's maybe taking some of the top end off, I want to be able to EQ it and have the transients of the EQ unfold a lot easier than if I'm doing it before. Unless I want to do that very thing. I might compress after a snare drum, but I might EQ after I compress a snare drum if I wanted to compress a snare drum. But I might EQ before a compressor if, for example, the job of that EQ is to trigger the compressor. So if I've got a bass and I wanted to control it a little bit more, I might push some 700, and that will trigger the compressor a certain way. And so I can mold the compressor, and then I might EQ again afterwards. So that's an example of where I specifically want to use the EQ to tone the whole sound I'm looking for. Sergio asks, since your seminar in 2011, I've been using your technique and slightly changing it on my own way. Lately, I went from OTB to hybrid and heard some stories that you have a second smaller mixing setup. I was just wondering if you have made some setup downsizing in the hybrid way. That would be really interesting. Oh yeah. For sure, I had to. I've set up a second room. It's more like a low budget room, lower budget. And the hybrid is like a mini-me of the main room. I have one rack that has my ABCD set up with summing amps, different sounding summing amps, for A, B, C, and D, which also shares the return of a lot of my effects. And the second rack has my mastering compressors, the final stage compressors, equalizers. Instead of having 4 different compressors to choose from, I have 2. The ones that sound the most different from each other. And I also have a few mono compressors that I use for my vocal returns. So I'm condensing from maybe 4 or 5 compressors down to 3 for my vocal sound. And that works great. I still want to maintain a hybrid. I want the sense of the analog, that feel, and that seems to be a great combination. Henning asks, when mixing lead vocals, I understand that you sometimes are using 1 fader bus to 3 to 5 vocal compressors. When you do it like this, are your effects and delay and reverbs sends pre-compression? Also, do you find that there are times when feeding an effect processor an uncompressed signal is preferable to the more traditional other way around? Let's not forget, by the time, I don't think I have ever gotten a vocal that hasn't already been processed. And now I'm processing it more. So there's never really a time when it isn't already uncompressed to a degree. But yes, you're right. Because I'm sending post a fader to 4 or 5 other compressors that are down here, I am mixing into the compressor, which are returning, but the reverbs and the delays that I'm sending off the sends are from basically pre the return of the compressors, which I never really noticed that I was doing until I think maybe somebody pointed it out. And I went, oh yeah, that's probably why. It's interesting how the reverbs seem to be clearer and at the same time, sometimes hard to hear if I've got too much of the returns because I can't match how much I'm sending to the reverb. So sometimes they seem to like I have to turn them up more. So that's, but I find that I prefer that sound than going down to the other end of the console and feeding those compressors into the reverb off the returns. You know, are there times when feeding an effect processor and uncompressed signal is preferable? Again, I don't know. Does it sound good? Yes, then that's preferable. But also remember that it's already processed to a degree. Pascal asks, what is your method to turn super busy arrangements into clear and punchy mixes? Well, whatever is busy goes down and maybe out. If it's too busy, I may just remove it to a point where there's a reason for it. But busy means 2 people, 2 sounds are fighting for the spotlight. So to make it less busy, choose which one is going to take the spotlight. And the other one either takes a super support role, or if in the case somebody says, yeah, this is a lot happening, but I like it super, super low. Well, I say, get it to super, super fuck out of here. You know what I mean? Hit the cut. Get rid of it. If it's that low, who cares? AJ asks, wondering if you could fire some suggestions for creating thickness in a vocal without the mud. And then the second question, which is also kind of connected, why do all the lead vocals you mix have that special distinctive sound? There's a special sound to the S's of Chris Martin, Katie Tunstall, and John Mayer. They're quite loud, but far from harsh. There's a solid bottom to your vocals, but no boominess, and the mids cut through, but never sound too phony. Is it always the same processing chain, and do you ever use multi-band compression? How much gain on the EQ would you consider heavy EQ? Is it more boosting, or is it more dipping, or a combination? Ooh, that's about 8 million questions in one. All right, let's start with creating thickness. Well, I am creating a compilation vocal sound by sending to 4 or 5 compressors. Each one of those compressors on their own are okay, but they only give you part of the picture. I'm specifically finding compressors that are part of the picture. If I wanted one to do it with just one compressor, I'd have to find one that really does it best. But I'm not doing it that way. So by getting one that has good head tone, good throat, good, maybe way more intensity than the singer actually had, I can feed that in there. I can make it a little bit more intense. I can add maybe one that's very aggressive sounding or has some distortion, gives that some thickness, natural warmth. By doing this, you have the option of changing a bit the attitude of the performance, because sometimes it's lacking. And so by doing this approach, you can bring back or enter into the performance what was lacking, which could have been intensity. So creating that thickness, it kind of comes naturally. Now, maybe some of these returns, I'll take a little 300 out of it. So as you're joining them all, they're not piling up on certain frequencies. So yes, I am basically doing that same chain all the time. That is part of the sound. The de-essing, because I've got these 4 or 5 compressors coming back in, depending on, I try to find one that might be bright in the upper mid-range and one that's dull, so I don't have too much of a loading in the 4K area. But because of that, there is a tendency for some of the S's to be enhanced. But I have 2 or 3 different de-essers that might be working. I might have the Renaissance at the end of the chain, the Oxford at the beginning of the chain, maybe even there's one that's called the Fab Esser or something, somewhere in the chain. And my assistant will just work those all carefully so that I have a strong S, but not one that's causing any bleeding in the ears. But it gives it solidness, but it's silky, it's soft, because I don't like that. I want to be able to turn the speakers up, and I don't want to be distracted by an S, because if you do, if it's too sizzly, it just takes away from the performance, and I'm not believing the singer anymore, because it just sounds too hyped. I don't use multiband compression across the vocal, and this is what I'm saying. The question is, quite often, before it even comes to the desk, I might be in Pro Tools. If I hear there's a problem, I may choose a multiband equalizer that, to me, it's doing the same job as a compressor. I'll find the frequencies that are bothering me, and then whenever that frequency is triggered, it brings it down a bit. I use this one plugin, Hoffa. There's, I'm sure, plenty more you can play with that are in waves. Do you consider heavy EQ 3 dB or 5 dB? I don't. The first thing I want to do is attenuate before I boost. I want to clean up the sound, because if you clean it up, then you may not need to boost, because now the problem, you've just removed it. So now the natural sound is showing itself. But I don't know what heavy EQ is. What I want to do is get it to sound right. And so I'm not looking at what I'm doing. If it's a lot, I don't care. It's not heavy EQ. It's not heavy EQ if it was lacking 5 dB at a certain frequency, and all I'm doing is actually boosting that amount just so I go back to 0 again, where it's, where it should be. So there. Minko, he asks, what are the 3 most common mistakes in mixing and how to avoid them? Well, The mistake is you forget that it's music. Have fun. Have fun. This is what it's about. You've learned how to work one of these things, so once you've done that, throw all the rules aside and have fun. Second mistake, common mistake, is you think too much. You forgot to just use your heart and base things on an emotional experience. Make decisions on that. Don't be sitting there all twinkling and stuff and you're thinking and you're thinking and you're thinking, because it gets you tired. And what are you thinking about? You shouldn't be thinking. It's music. Just react. You know, if you're a musician, all the more reason why you shouldn't be thinking so much. When you're playing an instrument, you're not thinking, you're just feeling. So do that when you're mixing. Third, the mistake is building the song around what should be a support role instead of the main role. What is the essence of that song? Build around that, not around the support factors. You build around the support factors and you're going to try and cram the main ones around it. It's not going to work. And a foundation, it's not like being a construction worker where you have to build the foundation of the ground up. No, foundation can be the roof. It can be the acoustic guitar and build around that, not around the kick and drums and bass. Not necessarily. That could be just a support factor around the way the song was written, which was around something like a guitar or a keyboard and a vocal. So, there you go. How's your approach to get mid-range separation to make the vocals fit in the mix? Well, that's making the assumption that I've built the whole track up and now I'm just trying to fit the vocal in. The way I do it is the other way around. I'd fit the song around the vocal, because after all, if this song is telling a story and the vocal is driving this song, that's not going to be the last thing I add to the mix. That's something I start early in the process and build around that. So I fit basically the song around the vocal, not the vocal to the song. Quasi, how do you deal with the recall epidemic these days, especially from younger artists being used to instant recalls? Not from a technical POV, I got that sorted out with my SSL, but from a business. Are you doing flat rates? How many revisions are you including? How do you do day rates? Well, there are many options, and you certainly find one that works best for your clientele and the budget. I mean, you can't be demanding stuff that's beyond what the budget can take. But it's true. I think a master mix these days is more like a recall in progress. The final decisions haven't been made. It's a good starting point. Sometimes, and other times, it's done. The mix is done. Everybody's committed to it, and there might be some tiny little tweaks. On how to charge for it, I think my manager usually includes 1, maybe 2 days on an album project for recalls, and maybe on a single, I don't know, couple revisions. The bottom line is you got to get these done. And I do full sets of stems now. So I rarely have to bring back on the desk a full recall. Because yes, you are competing with people who can do 1 million recalls they're mixing in the box, they hit it, boom, everything is back. For those of us who are doing analog or even, well, hybrid, everything is pretty much being untouched in a hybrid situation. But But what I'm doing is I'll have all the stems done, and then while I'm mixing, if there's requests for recalls, I'm having my assistant in the B room doing these fine tweaks. You know, sometimes it's usually just level changes. So I'm not dedicating a specific amount of time where I'm not doing anything else but these recalls. I'll have my assistant on doing the changes, and then I'll go in and I'll listen to it and I'll go, okay, that's good, send it. And so I'm being very efficient with my time. I'm still mixing and I'm dealing with the recalls at the same time. Jorn. After working on a mix for several hours, I feel that my work gets worse and worse. I hear people working on a mix for 16 hours or more, but I would start to destroy my mix long before that. How can I improve my mixing stamina? You're probably micro mixing. That's why you're getting so tired. You're focusing on all the wrong things. You should be not thinking. You should just be putting up the tracks, finding the ones that feel good, have fun, be having more fun, and do not think. The thinking process comes way later in the process when everything, automation is done, you've got the way you like it, you think it's good, then you listen to it on a small monitor, like a little boom box or something, and then you start thinking, asking yourself questions to, is this sounding good, or why doesn't the chorus feel good enough at this point? Then you can start thinking and micromanaging. But until then, spending hours on the drum sound, which is in a total vacuum because you don't know how really everything else is going to relate to it, will tire anyone out. So stop focusing on detail and just get the mix going. You should have a mix feeling really good in under 20 minutes by quickly finding the things that groove, the things that feel good. What is the essence of the song? Find it quickly and then start building around that. That's what I do. That's what my friends do. And then you can get nitpicky later if for a reason you're not quite getting the feel you're looking for. That's it.